Rain hammered against the windshield as David Chen glanced at the dashboard clock for the third time in 5 minutes. 6:45. He was already late and the traffic wasn't helping. His daughter's after-school program closed at 7, and Mrs. Rodriguez, the kind woman who ran it, had already stayed late for him twice this week. David tightened his grip on the steering wheel and merged into the faster lane of the highway. His mind raced through the checklist for the evening. Pick up Lily, stop by the pharmacy for her asthma medication, heat up the leftover chicken and rice for dinner, help with homework, give her a bath, and somehow squeeze in an hour of work he'd brought home. Being both mom and dad wasn't something he'd ever imagined for himself. But here he was, 2 years after losing his wife to cancer, still figuring it out one exhausting day at a time. The presentation at work had run long. His boss, Mr. Patterson, had spent an extra 30 minutes nitpicking every slide, asking David to justify decisions that had already been approved weeks ago. It felt personal lately. Patterson seemed to have it out for him, though David couldn't figure out why. He'd been a software engineer at Tech Vista Solutions for 6 years, always met his deadlines and his code was clean. But ever since he'd applied for the senior developer position, Patterson's attitude had shifted from indifferent to hostile. David needed that promotion. The salary bump would mean better health insurance, the kind that wouldn't leave him staring at medical bills at 2 in the morning, wondering which one to pay first. Lily's asthma had gotten worse over the past year, and every emergency inhaler, every doctor's visit, every urgent care trip added up. Some nights he'd listen to her breathing through the baby monitor, counting the seconds between breaths, ready to rush her to the hospital if that whistling sound got any worse. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the road into a blurry mess of red taillights and yellow lane markers. David slowed down, keeping a safe distance from the SUV ahead of him. Other drivers weren't being as careful, weaving between lanes like they had somewhere important to be. Don't we all, David thought. That's when he saw it. 3 cars ahead, a black sedan suddenly swerved, its tires losing grip on the wet pavement. It spun once, twice, and then hit the concrete barrier with a sickening crunch. The impact sent the car flipping over the barrier into the opposite lanes. Metal scraped against concrete, glass shattered, and then everything seemed to move in slow motion as the sedan rolled onto its roof and slid to a stop. David's heart jumped into his throat. Traffic around him screeched to a halt. Cars pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking on one by one. Through the rain, he could see the overturned sedan, its wheels still spinning slowly in the air. Smoke was starting to curl from under the crumpled hood. He pulled his car onto the shoulder and sat there for a moment, hands shaking. Other drivers were getting out, phones already pressed to their ears calling 911. That was good. Help was coming. But smoke meant fire, and fire meant time was running out for whoever was in that car. David looked at the clock again. 6:50. Mrs. Rodriguez would understand, wouldn't she? But what if she couldn't stay? What if Lily was standing there waiting, scared because Daddy was late again? The smoke from the sedan grew thicker, darker. David closed his eyes and saw his wife, Elena, in her hospital bed during those final days. She'd made him promise to always put Lily first, to keep her safe, to be there for her. He'd promised. He'd meant it with every fiber of his being. But he also heard Elena's voice from years before, back when they'd first started dating. They'd witnessed a minor fender bender, and David had started to drive past. Elena had looked at him with those fierce, beautiful eyes and said, "We're not the kind of people who just drive by, David. We're not." They weren't. And he couldn't be that person now, even if every logical part of his brain screamed at him to stay in the car, to let the professionals handle it, to think of his daughter waiting for him. David threw open his car door and ran into the rain. The highway was a chaos of stopped cars and shouting voices. He jumped over the barrier, his dress shoes slipping on the wet concrete. Up close, the sedan looked even worse. The entire driver's side was crushed inward, and the windshield had spiderwebbed into 1,000 cracks. The smoke was definitely coming from the engine now, and he could smell gasoline mixing with burning plastic. "Someone's in there," a woman shouted from behind him. "I can see movement." David dropped to his knees beside the overturned car and peered through the shattered passenger window. A woman was hanging upside down, held in place by her seatbelt. Her eyes were closed and blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, but her chest was moving. She was breathing. "Hey," David called out. "Can you hear me?" No response. The smoke was getting thicker and he could feel heat radiating from the engine compartment. "The fire department's on the way," someone yelled. "Just wait for them." David looked back at the engine. Small flames were visible now, licking up from underneath the hood. He'd seen enough action movies to know what came next if those flames reached the gas tank. They didn't have time to wait. He reached through the window, cutting his forearm on the broken glass, and felt for the seatbelt release. His fingers found the button and pressed, but nothing happened. The mechanism had jammed in the crash. Come on," David muttered, pressing again and again. The heat was growing more intense by the second. The woman groaned softly, her head lolling to the side. David pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around his arm, then punched at the remaining glass in the window frame to clear a bigger opening. He squeezed his upper body through the window, reaching up to support the woman's weight with one arm, while his other hand fought with the seatbelt mechanism. The flames were visible through the gap between the hood and the car body now, orange and hungry. Someone was screaming for him to get out, that the car was going to blow. His shoulders were wedged in the window frame, glass cutting into his back through his shirt, and his lungs burned from the smoke. With a final desperate yank, the seatbelt release gave way. The woman's full weight dropped into his arms and he pulled her toward him, dragging her through the window. His back screamed in pain as glass tore at his skin, but he kept pulling until they were both clear of the window. Other people rushed forward to help, hands grabbing at the woman, at him, pulling them both away from the wreck. David stumbled backward, his legs giving out, and he fell hard onto the wet pavement. Someone dragged him further from the car, and not a moment too soon. The sedan exploded in a ball of flame and smoke, the heat wave washing over them even from 20 feet away. David lay on his back in the rain, gasping for air, watching thick black smoke rise into the gray sky. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Paramedics would be here soon. The woman would be okay. She had to be. David's phone buzzed in his pocket. With shaking hands, he pulled it out. A text from Mrs. Rodriguez. "Don't worry about the time. Lily's helping me water the plants. Drive safe in this weather." He let his head fall back against the pavement and closed his eyes, rain washing the soot from his face. In the distance, he could hear the paramedics arriving, could hear people talking about the rescue, about the hero who'd saved that woman's life. Hero. David almost laughed. He was just a tired single dad who was going to be even later picking up his daughter now. But as the adrenaline started to fade and the pain in his back began to register, he thought of Elena and hoped she would have been proud. He hoped Lily would understand why Daddy came home covered in cuts and bruises tonight. He hoped his daughter would grow up knowing that sometimes being a good person meant taking risks, even when it wasn't convenient, even when you were scared, even when you had a million reasons to just keep driving. David winced as he pulled his shirt over his head the next morning. The cuts on his back had scabbed over during the night, and every movement reminded him of yesterday's rescue. He'd gotten home around 9 after spending 2 hours at the scene giving statements to police officers who kept calling him a hero. Mrs. Rodriguez had been understanding, like always, and Lily had been more worried than angry when she saw the bandages. He'd told her the truth, kept it simple. Daddy helped someone who was in trouble. That's what good people do. She'd hugged him tight and made him promise to be careful, her small voice muffled against his chest. At 8 years old, she'd already lost her mother. The fear of losing him too lived in her eyes sometimes, and it broke his heart every time he saw it. Now standing in his small bathroom mirror, David looked at the reflection staring back at him. Dark circles under his eyes, a bruise on his jaw he didn't remember getting, and that permanent tiredness that seemed to have moved into his bones 2 years ago. He grabbed his electric razor and tried to make himself presentable for work. The meeting. He'd completely forgotten about the client meeting yesterday evening. Patterson had scheduled it for 6:30, right when David should have been picking up Lily. He'd asked to reschedule it twice before, but Patterson had insisted it had to be yesterday. And then David had missed it entirely because he'd been pulling a woman from a burning car. His stomach twisted. Patterson was going to have a field day with this. At the kitchen table, Lily was eating cereal and watching videos on the tablet. She looked up when he came in, her expression serious. "Does it hurt, Daddy?" "A little bit," David admitted, pouring himself coffee. "But I'll be okay. You know I'm tough, right?" She nodded but didn't smile. "The lady you saved. Is she okay too?" I think so, sweetheart. The paramedics took good care of her. Did she say thank you? David paused. He'd left before the woman had regained consciousness, too worried about getting to Lily, too overwhelmed by everything. The paramedics had his information for their report, but he hadn't stuck around for gratitude or recognition. That wasn't why he'd done it. She was hurt, so she couldn't talk yet, but I'm sure she's grateful. Lily went back to her cereal, apparently satisfied. David drank his coffee and tried not to think about the conversation waiting for him at work. The office was buzzing when David walked in at 8:45. People clustered around desks, voices excited, everyone talking over each other. He caught fragments of conversation as he made his way to his cubicle. Can you believe it? Our CEO almost died. I heard the car exploded right after someone pulled her out. They're saying it was a miracle she survived. David froze mid-step. CEO? He turned to his coworker, Amy, who was standing nearby with her coffee mug. What's everyone talking about? Amy's eyes went wide. You didn't hear? Victoria Sterling was in a bad car accident on Tuesday night. The highway crash, it was all over the news. Someone saved her life, pulled her out of the car before it blew up. They're calling him a mystery hero because he left before anyone got his name. The coffee cup in David's hand suddenly felt very heavy. Victoria Sterling, the founder and CEO of Tech Vista Solutions, the woman who'd built this company from nothing 15 years ago and turned it into a tech industry powerhouse. He'd never met her, never even seen her in person. The executives worked on the top floor, in a different world from the engineers down on the 4th floor. That was her. The woman he'd pulled from the car. He'd saved Victoria Sterling's life. David, you okay? You look pale. He blinked, forcing himself to focus on Amy. Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired. Long night. Well, get some caffeine in you. Patterson's been asking about you. He seemed pretty annoyed. Of course he was. David made his way to his cubicle, his mind spinning. Should he tell someone? Should he go to HR and let them know it was him? But what would that accomplish? It would look like he was trying to use it for personal gain, trying to leverage saving the CEO's life into career advancement. That felt wrong, manipulative. He'd helped someone who needed help. That was it. The fact that she turned out to be his boss's boss didn't change anything. He'd barely sat down when his phone rang. Patterson's extension. Chen, my office. Now. The walk to Patterson's office felt like a march to the principal's office. Through the glass walls, David could see his supervisor sitting behind his desk, arms crossed, face set in that expression he'd come to know well over the past few months. Disapproval mixed with something that looked almost like satisfaction. David knocked and entered. Sit down. Patterson didn't look up from his computer screen. He let David sit there in silence for a full minute before finally turning to face him. The Meridian client meeting. The one scheduled for yesterday at 6:30. The one you missed completely. Want to explain that? There was an emergency. I had to help someone who was in danger. Patterson's eyebrow raised. An emergency? How convenient. Was this emergency more important than your job? More important than a client worth $2 million to this company? David felt his jaw tighten. Someone's life was in danger. Yes, that was more important. Let me tell you what's important, Chen. What's important is that I had to sit in that meeting alone, making excuses for why my engineer couldn't be bothered to show up. What's important is that the client specifically requested to meet you because you'd been handling their account, and you weren't there. What's important is that you made me look like I can't manage my own team. I sent you a text as soon as I could. I explained what happened. A text. You sent me a text saying you had an emergency. No details, no follow-up call, nothing. Patterson leaned back in his chair. This is part of a pattern, David. Late arrivals, leaving early, distracted during meetings. I know you've got personal issues and I've been patient, but this company can't run on excuses. Personal issues? David felt anger rising in his chest. My daughter has asthma. Sometimes I have to take her to urgent care. Sometimes I have to leave to pick her up because I'm all she has. And yesterday I was late because I pulled someone from a burning car. I'm sorry that inconvenienced you, but I'm not sorry I did it. Patterson's expression didn't change. I'm writing this up as a formal disciplinary action. It's going in your file, and I think we both know what this means for your promotion application. The promotion. The senior developer position that would mean a 40% pay raise and better health insurance. The position David had been working toward for 2 years. The position that would mean he could afford better care for Lily, could stop choosing between paying the electric bill or buying her medication. You're denying my promotion because I saved someone's life? I'm denying your promotion because you missed a critical client meeting, and because your performance over the past 6 months has been inconsistent at best. Patterson pulled out a folder from his desk drawer. I've documented everything. The days you've left early, the meetings where you seemed distracted, the projects that came in just barely on deadline. You're a decent engineer, David, but decent isn't enough for a senior position. David stared at the folder. 6 months of nitpicking, of Patterson watching his every move, waiting for him to slip up. This wasn't about performance. This was personal, but why? Is there anything else? Patterson asked, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. No. David stood up, his legs feeling unsteady. Nothing else. He walked back to his cubicle in a daze. Around him, people were still talking about Victoria Sterling, about the miracle rescue, about how lucky she was that someone had been brave enough to help. If only they knew. If only Patterson knew. But telling them wouldn't change anything. Patterson had made up his mind months ago. The rescue, the promotion, none of it mattered to him. David was just another employee to be managed, another problem to be documented. At his desk, David pulled up the financial spreadsheet he kept hidden in a folder labeled Personal. It tracked everything. Rent, utilities, groceries, Lily's medication, her doctor visits, the minimum payments on credit cards that never seemed to shrink. He'd been counting on that promotion. The salary increase would have covered Lily's inhaler costs, would have meant he could take her to the specialist her pediatrician recommended. Without it, he was stuck. Treading water, barely keeping his head above the surface, one emergency away from going under. His phone buzzed. A text from Lily's school nurse. Hi, Mr. Chen. Lily's feeling a bit wheezy today. Nothing serious yet, but wanted to give you a heads up. Her rescue inhaler is almost empty. She might need a new one soon. David closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The inhaler cost $200 without insurance, and his current insurance only covered half. He had maybe $300 in his checking account, and rent was due in a week, one crisis at a time. That's how he survived. One crisis at a time, he texted back. Thank you. I'll pick up a refill today. Then he opened his work email and tried to focus on code, on deadlines, on all the things that used to seem important before his wife died, and his world shrunk down to just him and his daughter, fighting to get through each day. Somewhere up on the executive floor, Victoria Sterling was probably back at work, grateful to be alive, unaware that the man who saved her was sitting 4 floors below, wondering how he was going to afford his daughter's next breath. Victoria Sterling had cheated death, and it changed everything. She sat in her corner office on the 15th floor, looking out at the city skyline but not really seeing it. The doctors had cleared her to return to work after just 3 days, amazed at how well she'd recovered. A concussion, some bruised ribs, 12 stitches in her forehead, and cuts on her arms. Considering her car had exploded, she'd gotten off easy. Lucky, everyone kept saying. You're so lucky. But Victoria didn't feel lucky. She felt haunted. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in that car, hanging upside down, smoke filling her lungs, unable to move, and then hands strong and sure pulling her free, a voice telling her it would be okay. The feeling of being carried away from the flames, and then nothing, just darkness until she woke up in the hospital. The police had told her that someone had saved her life, a man who'd risked everything to pull her from the wreckage and then disappeared before the paramedics could get his name. The traffic camera footage was too blurry, too rain-soaked to make out his face clearly. All they could see was a figure in business clothes running toward her car while everyone else stayed back. Who does that? Who risks their own life for a complete stranger and then just leaves without even waiting for a thank you? Victoria had built her company on the principle of recognizing talent, of finding extraordinary people and giving them opportunities to shine. She'd always prided herself on her ability to see potential where others saw nothing. And now someone had done something extraordinary for her, and she couldn't even find him to say thank you. It was driving her crazy. Ms. Sterling? Her assistant Gregory knocked on the open door. The investigator is here to see you. Victoria straightened in her chair. Send him in. The private investigator was a former police detective named Robert Hayes, recommended by her head of security. He'd been working the case for 2 days now, following up leads, reviewing footage, talking to witnesses. What did you find? Victoria asked before he'd even sat down. Hayes pulled out a tablet and opened a file. We got a partial license plate from a camera at a gas station half a mile from the accident site. Cross-referenced with the timeline and vehicle descriptions from witnesses, we tracked it to a 2015 Honda Civic registered to a David Chen. Victoria's breath caught.
David Chen, who is he?
That's the interesting part. Hayes swiped to another screen. He works here. Has for 6 years. He's a software engineer on your development team, 4th floor. The room seemed to tilt. Victoria gripped the edge of her desk. He works here? One of my own employees saved my life? Looks that way. We verified his whereabouts through building security. He left the office at 6:15 on Tuesday, which puts him on that highway at the exact right time. And we found this. Hayes turned the tablet toward her. It was a news photo taken by someone at the accident scene, blurry, but clear enough to show a man in a dress shirt and slacks, his back to the camera, being helped away from the burning wreckage by other bystanders. His shirt was torn, soaked with rain and what looked like blood. That's him, Hayes said. David Chen, 34 years old, single father, widowed 2 years ago. One daughter, 8 years old. Lives in a small apartment in the Riverside district. Been with the company since it was half this size. Victoria stared at the photo. 6 years. This man had worked for her for 6 years and she'd never known he existed. How many other employees had she never met, never acknowledged? When had she become so disconnected from the people who made her company run? I want his full employee file, she said quietly. Everything. Performance reviews, project history, all of it. Already pulled it. Hayes sent the files to her email. I'll leave you to review it. If you need anything else, just call. After he left, Victoria spent the next hour reading everything about David Chen. His work history was solid, excellent reviews for his first 5 years. His code was clean. His projects always delivered on time. But over the past 6 months, there'd been a shift. Notes from his supervisor about missed meetings, late arrivals, seeming distracted. A recent disciplinary write-up for missing a client meeting. The date on that write-up was Tuesday. The day of the accident. The day David Chen had saved her life. Victoria's jaw tightened. She picked up her phone and called HR. This is Sterling. I need you to pull all documentation related to David Chen. Employee ID 4782 also. Get me his supervisor's name and employment history. Right away. Ms. Sterling. His supervisor is Roger Patterson. Been with the company for 8 years, Patterson. Victoria knew that name. She scrolled through her memory, trying to place it. Then she remembered. Patterson's brother-in-law had applied for a senior development position last month. She'd seen the application herself during a routine review of high-level hires. The candidate had been mediocre at best, and HR had rejected him in the first round. Pull Patterson's file too, Victoria said, and find out who else applied for that senior developer position Patterson's team is hiring for. Yes, ma'am. Victoria hung up and sat back in her chair. Something wasn't adding up. A good employee with years of solid performance suddenly getting written up for minor infractions. A supervisor with a personal connection to a job candidate. And a man who'd risked his life to save hers being punished for it. She needed to see this for herself. That afternoon, Victoria did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She took the elevator down to the 4th floor and walked into the engineering department unannounced. The reaction was immediate. Heads popped up from cubicles like prairie dogs. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Someone dropped their coffee mug. The CEO never came down to the lower floors. When Victoria Sterling appeared in your department, it meant something big was either very right or very wrong. Please, everyone keep working, Victoria said, smiling to ease the tension. I just wanted to walk around, see the team in action. Don't mind me, but of course they minded. She could feel eyes following her as she walked through the rows of cubicles, taking in the details she'd been too busy to notice before. Family photos on desks, birthday decorations on a bulletin board, a walking pad under one standing desk. These weren't just employees. They were people with lives, with families, with stories. She found David's cubicle in the back corner. He was hunched over his keyboard, headphones on, completely absorbed in his work. His desk was neat but personal. A framed photo of a little girl with pigtails and a missing front tooth, holding up a drawing of a rainbow. A coffee mug that said "World's Best Dad." A pile of medical bills sticking out of a folder marked "To Pay." Victoria stood there for a moment, just watching him work. This was the man who'd saved her life. He looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from carrying too much for too long. There was a bandage on his forearm, probably from the broken glass. How many other injuries was he hiding under his clothes? David must have sensed her presence because he looked up suddenly, pulling off his headphones. His eyes widened when he recognized her. "Ms. Sterling," he said, standing up quickly and nearly knocking over his coffee. "I didn't know you were. Is everything okay?" Up close, Victoria could see the bruise on his jaw, the shadows under his eyes. This was the face she'd been searching for. The mystery hero. And he had no idea that she knew. "I'm fine," she said, keeping her voice casual. "Just doing some walking around, meeting people. I realized I haven't been down here in far too long. You're David Chen, right?" "Yes, ma'am." He looked nervous, like he expected to be fired on the spot. "How long have you been with the company, David?" 6 years this month. "And you like it here?" He hesitated, and in that pause, Victoria saw everything. The frustration, the exhaustion, the barely contained worry of someone who couldn't afford to lose this job but wasn't sure he could keep it either. "It's a good company," he said finally. "The work is interesting. The benefits are decent. I appreciate the opportunity." Such a careful answer. Such a diplomatic non-answer. "Tell me honestly," Victoria said, lowering her voice. "If you could change one thing about working here, what would it be?" David glanced around, then looked back at her. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, but then something shifted in his expression. A flash of the same courage that had made him run toward a burning car instead of away from it. "I'd want supervisors who judge people on their work, not on their personal circumstances," he said quietly. "I'd want a place where doing the right thing doesn't get you punished. Where being a good person matters as much as being a good employee." Victoria felt those words like a punch to the chest. When had her company stopped being that place? When had she let it become somewhere that punished heroes and rewarded bureaucrats? "That's a fair answer," she said. "Thank you for your honesty." She turned to leave, then paused. "David, how's your daughter?" "The one in the photo?" His expression softened immediately, the way parents' faces always did when someone asked about their kids. "She's good. Great, actually. She's the best thing in my life." "I can tell," Victoria said, smiling. "Hold on to that. The rest of it, all the noise and stress and difficulties, it'll work itself out. But family, that's what matters. Don't ever forget that." As she walked away, Victoria pulled out her phone and sent a message to her head of HR. "Office first thing tomorrow morning. We need to discuss David Chen, Roger Patterson, and some changes to how we evaluate our employees. Also clear my afternoon schedule for the rest of the week. I'll be spending time on different floors, meeting the people who actually run this company." She'd been given a second chance at life. It was time to make sure it counted for something. David couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. It had been 3 days since Victoria Sterling had appeared at his desk, asking him questions that seemed simple, but felt loaded with meaning. 3 days since she'd looked at him with those sharp, knowing eyes and asked about Lily. The whole interaction had lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it kept replaying in his head. Why had the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company taken time out of her day to talk to a random engineer? People were still gossiping about it in the break room. Some thought it meant layoffs were coming. Others figured she was scouting talent for a special project. David tried not to think about it. He had more immediate problems. Lily's inhaler had run out yesterday, and the pharmacy was giving him the runaround about the prescription refill. Something about needing prior authorization from the insurance company, which could take 3 to 5 business days. 3 to 5 days when his daughter could have an asthma attack and not be able to breathe. The thought made his chest tight with anxiety. He'd called the doctor's office twice, left messages both times. No callback yet. Meanwhile, Lily's teacher had emailed to say she'd seemed wheezy during recess and had to sit out from playing tag. David's phone was practically glued to his hand, waiting for the school nurse to call and tell him to come pick her up. "Chen, got a minute?" David looked up to see Amy standing at his cubicle, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a woman in a crisp gray suit with an HR badge clipped to her jacket. His stomach dropped. This was it. Patterson had followed through on his threats. They were letting him go. "I'm Diane Reeves from Human Resources," the woman said, extending her hand. "Would you mind coming with me for a brief meeting? It won't take long." David's hands had gone cold. "Am I being fired?" "No, nothing like that," Diane said quickly, but her expression was hard to read. "We just need to discuss some things. Please, if you'll come with me." The walk to the HR office felt like a funeral march. Other employees glanced up as they passed, their expressions curious, sympathetic, worried. News traveled fast in an office this size. By lunch, everyone would know David Chen had been called to HR. Diane led him to a small conference room and gestured for him to sit. "Can I get you some water? Coffee?" "I'm fine." David's voice came out steadier than he felt. "What's this about?" Diane sat across from him and opened a folder. "I want to start by saying you're not in any trouble. In fact, quite the opposite. But we need to ask you some questions, and we need honest answers. Can you tell me where you were on Tuesday evening, October 21st, around 6:45? The accident. They knew. But how? David's mind raced. Should he lie? Deny it? But what was the point? The police had his information. Anyone could have tracked him down. "I was on Highway 95, he said slowly. "There was an accident. A car went over the barrier. And what did you do?" "I helped. Someone was trapped inside and the car was on fire. I pulled her out." Diane nodded like she'd expected this answer. "Did you know who you were helping?" "Not at the time. I found out the next day when people were talking about it at work." "And you didn't think to mention this to anyone? To your supervisor, to HR?" David shifted in his seat. "I didn't think it mattered. I just did what anyone would do. I didn't want to make it into something it wasn't." "David." Diane leaned forward, her expression softening. "You saved Victoria Sterling's life, the CEO and founder of this company. That matters quite a bit." "I didn't know it was her. And even if I had known, I would have done the same thing. She needed help. That's all there was to it." Diane studied him for a long moment, then closed the folder. "Miss Sterling has been looking for you. She wanted to thank you personally, but more than that, she wanted to understand the kind of person who would risk their life for a stranger. Your personnel file came across her desk as part of that investigation." David's pulse quickened. "My file?" She noticed some inconsistencies. 6 years of excellent performance reviews, then suddenly a series of write-ups over the past 6 months. All from your supervisor, Roger Patterson. She asked us to look into it more closely. Oh no. This was worse than being fired. This was Patterson finding out that David had gone over his head, that he'd gotten the CEO involved in their dispute. Patterson would make his life hell. "I didn't complain to anyone," David said quickly. "I didn't ask for anyone to look into anything. I've been trying to keep my head down and do my job." "We know. But Ms. Sterling asked, and when the CEO asks, we dig deep." Diane pulled out another document. "Did you know that Patterson's brother-in-law applied for the senior developer position you were competing for?" David blinked. "What? No, I had no idea." "The candidate was rejected in the first round. Not qualified. But that was right around the time your performance reviews started going downhill." Diane slid the paper across the table. "We also found that Patterson has been documenting issues that, frankly, don't hold up under scrutiny. Late arrivals that were approved in advance for medical appointments with your daughter. Projects marked as barely on deadline that were actually submitted early. Meetings where you were supposedly distracted, but other attendees said you were fully engaged." David stared at the document, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He was building a case against me, to keep me from getting the promotion. That's what it looks like. And the disciplinary write-up for missing the client meeting, the meeting where you were actually saving Ms. Sterling's life, that was the final straw for her. She's asked me to inform you that the write-up has been removed from your file. It never happened. Relief washed over David, so intense it made him dizzy. "So I'm not being fired?" "No, David, you're being promoted." The words didn't make sense at first. David sat there waiting for the punchline, for the catch. "What?" "Ms. Sterling has personally approved your promotion to senior developer, effective immediately. It comes with a 40% salary increase, upgraded health insurance benefits, and 3 weeks of paid vacation. She wanted me to tell you in person." David's vision blurred. He blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of the HR director, but his eyes burned. 40%. That would cover Lily's medications, her doctor visits, everything. The health insurance would mean he could take her to that specialist, get her the care she really needed. I don't understand, he managed. Patterson said I was denied. Patterson no longer has authority over personnel decisions on his team. He's being transferred to a different department while we complete a full investigation into his management practices. In the meantime, you'll be reporting directly to Janet Wu, the director of engineering. She's excited to have you on her team. David sat back in his chair, overwhelmed. This morning, he'd been worried about losing his job, about how he'd afford Lily's inhaler, about whether he could keep the lights on next month. And now, in the span of 10 minutes, everything had changed. There's one more thing, Diane said. Ms. Sterling would like to meet with you. Today, if possible. She's been waiting to thank you properly. David's phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably the pharmacy again with more delays. Or the school nurse. Or another bill he couldn't pay. Except now maybe he could pay it. Maybe everything was going to be okay. When? He asked. How about now? She's in her office. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt surreal. David caught his reflection in the polished doors. Same tired face, same cheap tie, same guy who'd been drowning in debt and worry this morning. But something was different. There was hope now, fragile and new, but real. Diane led him past the executive assistants, through doors that felt too fancy for someone like him, and into an office with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire city. Victoria Sterling stood from behind her desk when they entered. Up close, David could see the stitches on her forehead still healing, a reminder of how close she'd come to dying. David, she said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. Thank you for coming up. Ms. Sterling. He didn't know what else to say. She walked around the desk and, to his complete surprise, pulled him into a brief hug. When she stepped back, her eyes were glistening. Thank you, she said simply. Thank you for giving me another chance to live. Another chance to see my grandchildren grow up. Another chance to fix the mistakes I've made. I just did what anyone would do. No. Victoria shook her head firmly. Most people drove past. Most people called 911 and stayed safe. You ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. You risked everything for a stranger. That's not what anyone would do. That's what heroes do. David felt his face flush. I'm not a hero. I'm just a dad trying to take care of his kid. You're both. Victoria gestured to the chairs by her window. Please sit. I want to hear about your daughter. Lily, right? They talked for an hour. David told her about Lily's asthma, about the struggle to afford her medication, about trying to be both parents rolled into one. Victoria listened. Really, listened, asking questions that showed she cared about the answers. She told him about her own journey, about starting Tech Vista in a garage 20 years ago, about the sacrifices she'd made and the relationships she'd neglected while building her empire, about her grandchildren who barely knew her because she'd been too busy to show up for the important moments. The accident changed me, she admitted. It made me realize I'd lost touch with what matters. I built this company on the idea of rewarding excellence, of recognizing good people. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing the people. I stopped being present. She looked at David with an intensity that made him shift in his seat. You reminded me who I wanted to be, not just by saving my life, but by who you are. The way you put your daughter first. The way you do the right thing even when it costs you. That's the kind of person I want working here. That's the kind of culture I want to build. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just keep being who you are. Victoria smiled. And take your daughter to see that specialist. The new insurance starts immediately. No waiting period. When David left her office 45 minutes later, his phone was buzzing again. This time it was a text from Lily's school. Mr. Chen, just wanted to update you. Lily's breathing is good today. She played at recess and did great. Have a wonderful afternoon. David stood in the elevator, reading that message over and over, and finally let himself cry. 3 months later, David found himself standing in the auditorium at Tech Vista headquarters, watching as nearly 500 employees filed in for the quarterly company meeting. These meetings used to be boring. Mandatory events where executives droned on about revenue numbers and corporate goals while everyone checked their phones under the table. But things had changed. Victoria Sterling walked onto the stage, and the room erupted in applause. Not the polite, obligatory clapping from before, but genuine enthusiasm. She'd spent the past 3 months doing something unprecedented for a CEO. She'd been showing up, not just in boardrooms and executive meetings, but in the break rooms and cubicles and late-night coding sessions. She'd had lunch in the cafeteria with the customer service team. She'd sat in on project meetings with the design department. She'd learned names, asked about families, listened to concerns. The distance between the 15th floor and everyone else had shrunk, and people noticed. David sat in the 4th row next to his new team. Janet Wu, his new supervisor, had turned out to be everything Patterson wasn't. She cared about results, not politics. She valued creativity over conformity, and when David had to leave early for Lily's doctor appointment last week, she'd simply said, "Family first, always. Let me know if you need anything. Good morning." "Everyone," Victoria began, her voice clear and confident. The stitches on her forehead had been removed weeks ago, leaving only a faint scar, a reminder she'd told David of second chances. "I want to start today by talking about something personal. 3 months ago, I almost died." The room went quiet. Everyone knew the story by now, but hearing it from Victoria herself was different. A car accident that should have killed me. But it didn't, because someone decided that my life was worth risking his own. Someone who didn't know who I was, didn't care about getting recognition, just saw another human being in trouble and acted. Victoria's eyes found David in the crowd. He felt his face flush as heads started turning, people following her gaze. David Chen has worked for this company for 6 years. 6 years of excellent work that I never knew about. Because I'd stopped paying attention to the people who make this company run. He saved my life, and in doing so, he saved this company too. Because he reminded me what we're really supposed to be about. She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her lit up with a new logo. Today, I'm announcing the launch of the Everyday Heroes Fund, a program dedicated to supporting employees who demonstrate extraordinary character, both at work and in their communities. But more than that, it's a commitment to creating a culture where good people are recognized, where doing the right thing is rewarded, and where we take care of each other. The applause was thunderous. David felt his coworkers patting his back, shaking his hand, and he managed to smile even as his throat tightened with emotion. Victoria continued, outlining the specifics. Emergency assistance for employees facing financial hardship, grants for community service, recognition programs that valued character as much as performance metrics. It was everything David had wished existed during his darkest moments, now becoming reality for everyone at the company. After the meeting, people crowded around David, congratulating him, thanking him, sharing their own stories of struggle and hope. It was overwhelming in the best way possible. "Dad!" David turned to see Lily running toward him across the lobby, her backpack bouncing. Behind her, Victoria Sterling walked slowly, smiling at the scene. David had mentioned that Lily had a half-day at school today, and Victoria had surprised him by offering to pick her up and bring her to the office. Lily crashed into his arms, and he lifted her up, spinning her around like he used to when she was smaller. She was getting too big for it, really, but she still giggled like a little kid. "Miss Victoria showed me her office," Lily exclaimed. "It's so high up you can see everything. And she has pictures of her grandkids on her desk, and one of them is my age." "Did you behave yourself?" David asked, setting her down. "She was an angel," Victoria said, joining them. "We had quite the conversation about robotics and space exploration." "Your daughter is brilliant, David." Lily beamed at the compliment. Over the past 3 months, Victoria had become an unexpected presence in their lives. Not intrusive, not overbearing, but genuinely interested. She'd attended Lily's school science fair last month, where Lily had presented her project on renewable energy. She'd sent a care package when Lily had a bad asthma flare-up. She'd become something like a grandmother figure, filling a void that had existed since David's own mother had passed away years ago. "Can we show Ms. Victoria your new office?" Lily asked, tugging on his hand. "I'd love to see it," Victoria said. They took the elevator up to the 6th floor where the senior development team had their workspace. David's new office was modest, but it had a door and a window, 2 things he'd never had before. Lily had helped him decorate last week, insisting on putting up the drawing she'd made of the two of them holding hands under a rainbow. "It's perfect," Victoria said, studying the drawing. "You know what I love about this? It shows what matters most. Not the fancy title or the corner office, but the people we love." She turned to David, her expression serious. "I've been thinking about something. The specialist you took Lily to see, Dr. Morrison. She mentioned that Lily would benefit from being in a better environment, somewhere with cleaner air and less pollution." David nodded. "Yeah, she said the city air isn't great for her lungs, but moving isn't really an option right now. Maybe someday when I've saved up enough." "What if I told you Tech Vista is opening a new satellite office? Smaller team, beautiful location up in Riverside Valley. Clean air, good schools, lower cost of living. I'm looking for a senior developer to lead the technical team there." David stared at her. Riverside Valley was everything he'd dreamed of for Lily. Trees and parks and clean mountain air. But it was also 2 hours away from here. "I couldn't ask you to create a position just for me," he said. "You're not asking. I'm offering, and it's not just for you. This has been in the works for months. But yes, I immediately thought of you for the role. Better environment for Lily, same salary, and you'd be building something from the ground up. Plus, there's a great elementary school right down the street from the office. Lily could walk there after school, or there's an after-school program that goes until 6. David looked down at his daughter, who was watching him with those big, hopeful eyes. No more worrying about pickups. No more rushing through traffic. No more watching her struggle to breathe in the smoggy city air. "Can we, Dad? Please?" "Ms. Victoria said there's a robotics club at the school there. You've been conspiring with my daughter," David said to Victoria, but he was smiling. "Guilty as charged. So what do you say?" David thought about the tiny apartment where every noise from the neighbors bled through the walls. He thought about the emergency room visits in the middle of the night, the constant worry about Lily's breathing. He thought about the future he'd been too afraid to imagine, the dreams he'd put on hold. When do we start? The moving day came 6 weeks later. David hadn't owned much to begin with, so packing was easier than expected. His coworkers had thrown him a going-away party, though several of them joked they'd probably see him on video calls anyway. The new house was small, a rental, but it had a yard. An actual yard where Lily could play without worrying about traffic or pollution. The elementary school was 3 blocks away, with a robotics program that had already accepted Lily's application. On their first morning in Riverside Valley, David woke up early and found Lily already outside, sitting in the grass, just breathing. The sun was rising over the mountains, painting everything gold and pink. The air smelled like pine trees and fresh earth. He stepped outside and sat next to her. "It's so quiet here," Lily whispered, like she was afraid to break the spell. "Good quiet or bad quiet?" "Good quiet. I can hear birds, Dad." So many birds they sat there together as the neighborhood woke up around them. A jogger passed by and waved. Someone's dog barked happily in a nearby yard. Normal, peaceful, safe. David's phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "First day in the new place. How is it?" He took a photo of Lily sitting in the grass, her face turned up toward the sun, and sent it to her with one word. "Perfect." 3 dots appeared. Then her response. "That's what second chances look like. Proud of you both. See you on the video call Monday. And David, thank you for everything." He pocketed his phone and put his arm around his daughter. "Dad?" Lily looked up at him. "Remember when you told me that good things happen to good people?" "I remember. I think you were right. You saved that lady because you're good, and then good things happen to us. Like magic, but real." David pulled her close, breathing in the clean mountain air, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face, and the solid presence of his daughter beside him. Real magic? That's exactly what it was. 2 years of struggle, of barely hanging on, of wondering if things would ever get better. And then one moment, one choice to help a stranger, had changed everything. Not because he'd expected anything in return, but because sometimes the universe noticed when you did the right thing. Sometimes it rewarded kindness with kindness.